Hello everyone, and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece on this channel. If any of that sounds interesting to you, then please feel free to give this video a like and to subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And welcome to another episode of The Critical Corner. If you are new here, first of all, welcome. And secondly, The Critical Corner is a reoccurring series on my channel where I do reviews of either all music or all movies in shorter form because I just don't have enough time to get to everything. Plus, I'm really enjoying the Critical Corner format more and more, so you're going to be seeing a lot of it as opposed to my individual album or movie reviews for the near future, I think. But today's episode is going to be focused on all music. So, without further ado, let's get into our first album. Beartooth are back with their fourth release, Below, and as always, I am interested to see what Caleb Shomo is going to release with Beartooth. Now, I'll admit that they have not ever been able to match up to their first album, but then again, that album did come from a very special place. A very depressing place, I would say. The songs on Disgusting have a very special factor to them where there's a lot of raw emotion put into each and every song on the album to the point where it's a nearly perfect album for me. And I feel like it did a lot for revolutionizing the metalcore space when it was released. And I think a lot of bands were inspired by Beartooth at the time when that album came out. But how does Below hold up? Well, I would say this is another great album from Beartooth. It's hard to say whether I like this one as much as Disease, because Disease has only continued to grow on me, and plus that one has the benefit of being listened to a lot more times. But Below, I've already listened to a lot this year. It is a really solid album from Beartooth, and I think it does some really good things. I think it does some very well done experimentation with Beartooth's sound, but there are definitely some points where their format is still very much so intact. Now, some are going to say that this album is more intense from Beartooth than their previous album, and in some ways I would agree, but in some other ways I would disagree and say that it might be their most accessible in other places. Now, the first track, Below, would not give you that indication. The title track is heavy and intense, and I think works very well as a good introduction to this album. Really gets your head banging with some killer lyrics and just has a really fun time, but at the same time does have a pretty dark message that I think is important to listen to. And then we get into Devastation, which was such a good lead single for this album, and is definitely one of my top favorites. I have not been able to get enough of that song. Dominate is where we do see the debate for Beartooth potentially being the most intense they've ever been on this album, as this is definitely one of their most intense songs. It just goes off, and is by far my favorite on the album personally. I think Beartooth does an excellent job at balancing between the clean moments and the heavy moments here, and there's some excellent drumming on this song as well as one of Beartooth's best breakdowns and some of Caleb's most brutal screams. He really goes off on this song, and you can feel his intensity with every word he's singing. No Return is also really good, probably being my second favorite on the album. It's one of the more accessible on the album in terms of what it does, but I think it actually does a very good job in terms of being one of the catchiest songs that Beartooth has ever made. And plus the breakdown in this song, Beartooth always does a good job at incorporating breakdowns, I feel like, but on this song in particular, it just came absolutely out of nowhere, and is one of the craziest and most unique breakdowns that the band has ever done. There's other great songs on here, such as Fed Up, which has some of Beartooth's more punky energy. This one reminds me a lot of Used and Abused from their last album. And then I Won't Give Up as well, which is another Beartooth song that is more laid back. In fact, I would say that this is the album that has the most accessible songs from Beartooth to date, which is why I debate to say that it's their heaviest. It definitely has some very heavy moments on it, such as the title track and Dominate and Hell of It. Songs like that are pretty heavy. But then there's other songs that are the most laid back the band has ever been, even compared to songs on Disease. Now, there are definitely some problems I have with this album. For one, some of the songs on here definitely do follow the Beartooth formula almost to a T. One I can think of for this is Phantom Pain, for an example. While there are some elements of this one that I like, it just feels like it goes through the motions to me and isn't as interesting as it could be. Skin is by far my least favorite on the album, is an example of Beartooth not doing a good job at being radio friendly. In fact, this one feels way too pandering to the radio and isn't as creative as a song like No Return. It doesn't have very many creative elements, and even the breakdown is sort of just not that interesting. It comes and goes without leaving much of an impact. Also, The Past is Dead, while I don't hate this song, it has started to irritate on me, especially with the filler woes. Still, Beartooth's formula is not a bad formula by any means, and even though there are certainly songs on here where they're following their formula very closely, even on the lead single Devastation, it is a Beartooth formula, I still find myself enjoying it more often than not. I can't fault them too much. And when this album is having a good time with high production values and great breakdowns, and Caleb having some of his best vocal performances and best written choruses, and even best written breakdowns to date, this is a really good album. I can't quite say that it's as good as Disease yet, and it's definitely not as good as Disgusting, but it goes above and beyond aggressive for me. It's at least close with Disease at the end of the day. If not better, but I don't know at the end of the day. I haven't made that decision. So with that, I'm going to give this album a very strong 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is the newest from the pop artist Marina, called Ancient Dreams in a Modern Land. Although calling her a pop artist is a little bit reductive, because I feel like Marina is doing a lot more on this album than some other pop artists out there are doing. Now, this is the first Marina album I've listened to, and I definitely think I need to go through her backing discography after hearing this one, because I really enjoyed what she was doing here with these synth pop landscapes, making some songs that are irresistible and so easy to return to. The title track being one of them, just having a great synth groove to it that I really enjoyed, and already being one of my top favorites on the album. She starts off this album very cynical about herself as a person, but we sort of go through a journey in this album where she's starting to accept more things about herself as a person, and the album starts to become more and more personal. It starts off very universal, but then goes deep. And I'll admit, I like the first half of this album a little better than the second half, because it is a little more fun, in my opinion, but that doesn't mean the second half is bad by any means. Venus Flytrap is just a great pop jam, with some great synth grooves in it, and a very fun chorus. And Man's World takes things a little more seriously after the very fun Venus Flytrap, and is probably my favorite song on the album, with a chorus that just absolutely soars. This song reminds me of what Lana Del Rey would be like if she was a more interesting artist. Marina sort of has similar vocal cadences to her, but I think that she knows how to make more engaging songwriting, in my opinion, and this song is definitely an example of that. Purge the Poison is another pretty fun song that comes and goes, but has some really good political messages underlying it when you look into it. And then Highly Emotional People is a simply gorgeous song where Marina goes into a very high vocal register that really works for her. And the song talking about emotions and accepting that we do have these emotions, and that's just who we are as people, is a very interesting subject to tackle, in my opinion. Now, like I said, the second half of this album does get more personal, and there are definitely some deeper moments at work here, such as the closer, Goodbye, which is a very emotional moment. Now, there are some tracks on here that just don't engage me as much as I wish they would, such as New America. While I do appreciate the message on it, I feel like could be a little more subtle in what it's saying. At the same time, I understand that Marina's wanting to be obvious in her political messagings, but even musically, the song doesn't interest me as much. The same goes for Pandora's Box. While having an interesting concept, I don't know if I really like this one as much as I want to. And the song I Love You But I Love Me More is just sort of forgettable to me. Still, this is a really good synth pop record, and I think is really high tier in regards to that genre. So with that, I'm going to give this album a very strong 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have the newest from Backwash, entitled I Lie Here Buried With My Rings and Dresses. Now, some of my viewers may not know who this artist is, and admittedly, I didn't know who this artist was until this year, when I saw a lot of critics that I watch really hyping this album up. So, out of curiosity, I went through her backing discography, and I really liked what I heard. This artist is great at her craft. She does a great job of infusing rap and metal together in some ways that are really ingenious and sometimes can come across as very unsettling, and purposefully so. She has a metal spirit for sure, and also a rap spirit. Both of them come across in her songs very well. I like her previous album, God Has Nothing to Do With This, Leave Him Out of It, and Deviancy is a really brutal EP that really comes and goes and leaves quite an impact. But I think this new album of hers might be her best. And man, I just don't know where to start. I feel like this is one of those albums, similarly to Fiona Apple's album from last year, where I feel like you just sort of have to hear it for yourself to see what you're really getting into. There are some haunting moments on here. The title track in particular is about as metal as any metal song I've heard this year, with a chorus that just goes off the rails in terms of what it does, with some of the most ear-piercing screams I've heard, and I say that in a good way. And Backwash herself as a vocalist is just great across this album, spitting some lyrical venom that is hard-hitting and very powerful. I just don't want to say much about this album. I feel like it's one that you need to experience for yourself, as Backwash talks about different types of struggles such as drug addiction and her own struggles with her identity and things like that, as well as her struggles as a woman of color. It is a very powerful album in that regard, and I think the arc of the album is really well done. It is a harrowing album, and it is sort of a hard listen in terms of the lyrical content it tackles, but I think it's a necessary one for this year. It is one of my favorite albums of the year so far, and the title track is certainly one of my favorite songs of the year as well. Very strong 4 out of 5 stars for this one. Next up, we have Doja Cat's newest release, Planet Her. Now, Doja Cat is an interesting artist to me, because I sort of was put off by her with her weird meme persona. I'll admit it was sort of funny, but it was also sort of weird to me, and I wasn't sure why people found it as hysterical as it did. But the more I looked into Doja Cat, the more I realized that she is just a very charming personality, and that's just sort of who she is. She likes to be a meme persona and likes to be sort of comical and funny, and you can even see that in her TikToks. That makes her one of the most fun pop artists to follow. I also think she's very talented. I think she does a great job at both singing and rapping. Sometimes her rapping isn't my favorite thing in the world, but other times she really impresses, such as on a song like Say So, which was one of my favorite hit songs of last year, where she did simply a great job at rapping on that song. So I was very interested to see what this album would hold, and I'll admit, I was a little disappointed here. This album is not as good as I was hoping it would be. I was really looking forward to it, especially with the lead single Kiss Me More, which is probably my favorite song by Doja Cat at this point. That song is just an irresistible pop jam with some great lyrics and just a sense of fun, and SZA's feature is awesome on it. It's a pop song that hasn't left the radio, but I'm not really complaining. I haven't gotten enough of it yet, to be honest. It is a very fun pop song. But the rest of this album doesn't hold up quite as much. I don't think there's any song that really holds a candle to Kiss Me More. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some good songs on here. For example, the beginning track, Woman, has a lot of personality to it. Also, some of the featured songs on here are good. I Don't Do Drugs features Ariana Grande, and as usual, Ariana does a great job on this song. And On You Right, it features The Weeknd, and The Weeknd is awesome on there. The only negative of tracks like these is I do feel like the featured artists almost outshine Doja in her own song. Ariana Grande sounds a little more confident on I Don't Do Drugs than Doja Cat does, and You Right, The Weeknd sounds a little more confident on Doja Cat than that track. That doesn't mean that Doja is bad on these songs, but I feel like the featured artists, just their gravitas and their charisma, might outshine hers ever so slightly. On songs where she's more comfortable is where she can really shine at her best, like Woman, for an example, or the song Love to Dream, which is very unique on this album and goes in a totally different direction compared to most songs on here. I feel like Doja Cat is a very interesting vocalist, but sometimes her production betrays her. This is especially true on a song like Need to Know, which probably is the worst song on here in terms of what it's doing. Maybe because it's produced by Dr. Luke, who I can't stand for obvious reasons. But even on other songs, the production just doesn't suit her, I feel like, as a pop vocalist. There are other songs where it works, but then there's other songs where it just doesn't really do her much justice. And I feel like the lyrics on some songs just are very cliched, typical pop lyrics that you'd hear. The album ending on Kiss Me More definitely ends it on a positive note, but I can't ignore the very forgettable moments on this release. 2.5 out of 5 stars for me. Not the worst thing I've heard, but definitely not the best. I would take Planet Her any day over Maroon 5's newest Jordy. Once again, this band has made something that is pretty much irredeemable trash. I feel like they've just continued to be on a downward slope, and this might be their worst yet. Wow, is this album insufferable to get through. Some of the most cliched pop and most boring stuff I've heard. The Billboard has a lot more interesting to offer these days, and I feel like Maroon 5 is just there to fill the gaps for filler music when you're just driving and don't have anything else you want to hear. There are some okay moments on here, I suppose. Lost is not a horrible song and might actually be the best here in terms of what it does. It at least has a catchy groove. Beautiful Mistakes is an okay song, but I feel like Megan Thee Stallion is the only thing that makes it interesting. But other than that, and the song featuring her, this album is just horrible. There's just bad song after bad song. Seasons is absolutely embarrassing with some of the most cringe-inducing lyrics. It's clear this song was trying to be a TikTok trend song, but it just does not work. And Echo with Black Bear, putting Adam Levine and Black Bear together, one of the worst matches ever. It's insufferable. And for the rest of this album, I'm not going to give it much dignity and talk about the rest of it, because it's just cliched pop lyric after cliched pop lyric. Memories is just a song that has become absolutely tiresome to me. I could go without ever hearing that song ever again. And Nobody's Love is just Adam being who he is, just an insufferable, hopeless romantic who has nothing interesting to say. This is a terrible album, and the rest of the band might as well not exist. It's the Adam Levine show now, and it has been that way for years. Man, remember when this band used to be good? It's been so long. They're just not anything anymore. It's just filler is all it is, and they're just out there to make money. Adam and his bandmates. It's just terrible, and one of the worst albums I've heard this year. 1 out of 5 stars for me. Thankfully, we end on a slightly more positive note with the Maine's newest album, XOXO, From Love and Anxiety in Real Time. Now, the Maine is a group that I'm actually a pretty big fan of. I like their albums American Candy and their follow-up album, Lovely Little Lonely. Both of them are really good. And while their previous album was not quite as good as their big streak of good albums, I did still enjoy it quite a bit. I will say this is probably the most significant misstep that the Maine has made in recent memory. They embrace pop a lot more on this album, and I feel like that makes this album a little more forgettable compared to their others. That doesn't mean there aren't good songs on here. Sticky is just what the song would imply. Very sticky. It sticks in your head. The chorus is very repetitive, but it is catchy, and it is a fun lead single. Lips reminded me of what I wish the last 1975 album would have been throughout. They're definitely exuding that aura, and it makes for a great song. And From Anxiety in Real Time is also a great track, having some of the most poignant lyrics on the album, in my opinion. The same goes for the ending track, Face Towards the Sun, which is a very powerful way to end this album, and I think stands tall above a lot of other songs on this album. In fact, it almost might stand too tall above, because the other songs on this album, some of them just don't work as well as they could. Similarly to Doja Cat's album, I do feel like this album suffers from having some forgettable moments, which is not something that I usually attribute to the Maine, but there's some songs that just sort of come and go without leaving a whole lot of impact, such as High Forever, which reminds me of Imagine Dragons more than anything, and I don't say that as a compliment here. Also, Dirty Pretty Beautiful is way too repetitive for my taste, but at the same time, this isn't a bad album to me. I just think that it does show a significant step down for the Maine. I think there are some decent moments on here, and songs like Lips and Sticky and the closing track, Face Towards the Sun, are definitely really good cuts. It's just that there are some cuts on here that are a noticeable step down for the band, and I think that might be because they are doing a bit more mediocre pop stuff on this album. Whereas on previous albums, they've been able to innovate with their pop elements. This one, they're not really doing that as much. 3 out of 5 stars for me. So yeah, that was my latest episode of The Critical Corner. What were your thoughts on any of the albums I talked about? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James. I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece. And if any of that sounds interesting to you, once again, I ask you to leave a like and to subscribe to this channel for future content. And be on the lookout for a new video very soon talking about a series of movies that I'm going to be ranking and reviewing. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.